Have you ever noticed how the most powerful people in any room are rarely the ones doing the talking? They don't argue, they don't defend, they simply observe, nod, and somehow everyone ends up doing exactly what they wanted. And the fascinating part, no one realizes they've been guided. Now imagine if you understood this mechanism, if you could shape outcomes without ever appearing to push, influence decisions without making demands, redirect entire conversations without saying a controversial word. What would change in your life? That's where Machiavelli's genius lives. Not in force, but in the art of invisible architecture. You've been taught that honesty is always the best policy, that transparency builds trust, that showing your cards demonstrates integrity. And while there's beauty in that philosophy, there's also a brutal reality you need to face. The world doesn't reward the transparent. It rewards those who understand the game well enough to play it without anyone noticing they're playing. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something that most people spend their entire lives denying. He said, "Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. Not because people are stupid, but because they're predictable. They follow patterns, they react to triggers, they move like clockwork when you understand what winds them up." But here's what nobody tells you. The most effective manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation at all. It feels like their own idea. When you plant a suggestion so subtly that someone believes they thought of it themselves, you've achieved what Machiavelli called virtù, the ability to shape fortune through skillful action. And the cruelest irony? The better you become at this, the more authentic you appear. Do you know why? Because true manipulation isn't about lying. It's about strategic truth. It's knowing which truth to reveal, which to withhold, and which to present at exactly the right moment for maximum impact. It's understanding that people don't want reality. They want their version of reality confirmed. And when you can give them that confirmation while steering them toward your desired outcome, you become unforgettable without ever being obvious. Think about your daily interactions. How many times have you forced your opinion, pushed your agenda, insisted on being heard, and how many times did that actually work? Probably less than you'd like to admit. Because the moment people sense you're trying to control them, their defenses activate. They resist, they argue, they dig in harder just to prove you wrong. But when you withdraw your agenda, when you ask questions instead of making statements, when you appear genuinely curious about their perspective, something magical happens. They lower their guard, they explain themselves, and in explaining, they reveal exactly what buttons to push, what fears to address, what desires to amplify. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow, those parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. And here's where Machiavelli meets depth psychology. Every person has a shadow they're hiding from, a fear they won't name, a desire they can't admit. And the person who can see that shadow, who can speak to it indirectly through story, metaphor, or carefully crafted suggestion, that person holds more power than any general with an army. You're not learning to be cruel. You're learning to be effective. There's a massive difference between manipulation for destruction and influence for mutual benefit. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for evil. He was describing reality. And reality is this. Either you understand how influence works, or you remain perpetually influenced by those who do. The mask you wear in social situations, that persona Jung described, everyone else is wearing one too, and most people are so busy maintaining their own mask that they never learn to read others. But when you understand that every interaction is theater, that everyone is playing a role, you can write better scripts, not to harm, but to navigate. Not to deceive, but to direct outcomes towards something better than the chaos that happens when nobody's steering. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're already being manipulated every single day. By advertisers who understand your insecurities, by algorithms that predict your behavior, by people who learned these skills before you did. The question isn't whether manipulation exists. It's whether you'll remain blind to it or develop the awareness to protect yourself and, when necessary, use it with integrity. Now we descend into darker territory. The reason most people never master influence isn't because they lack intelligence. It's because they can't stomach the truth about human nature. They want to believe people are rational, fair, consistent. But Machiavelli spent years observing power dynamics in Renaissance Italy, and what he discovered contradicts everything you were taught in school. People are not moved by logic. They're moved by emotion wrapped in the appearance of logic. They don't want truth. They want their beliefs validated. They don't respect fairness. They respect strength disguised as reasonableness. And the most dangerous illusion you can hold is that being good protects you from those who figured this out. Jung understood this at the psychological level. He said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." But let's take that deeper. When someone irritates you, it's because they're triggering something unresolved in your psyche. And here's what Machiavelli would add. People who understand this can irritate you strategically. They can trigger your patterns, watch you react predictably, and use that predictability against you. Think about the last argument you lost, not because you were wrong, but because you got emotional. Someone said something that pushed your button, and suddenly you were defending, explaining, justifying. You lost your center, and in that moment, they won. Not through superior logic, but through superior understanding of your psychology. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about appearing virtuous while being flexible with virtue itself. It's not hypocrisy. It's strategic self-presentation. You understand that people judge by appearances, so you control the appearance while maintaining your actual values privately. You play the social game without letting the game play you. But here's where most people get stuck. They think this makes them fake. They believe authenticity means vomiting every thought and feeling without filter. But that's not authenticity. That's lack of self-control masquerading as honesty. True authenticity is knowing exactly who you are while having the discipline to reveal only what serves your purpose in any given moment. The persona you show your boss should differ from the one you show your friends. The energy you bring to a negotiation should differ from the energy you bring to a date. This isn't being two-faced, it's being contextually intelligent. And those who can't adapt their presentation to different environments aren't more authentic. They're just less socially skilled, and they wonder why life feels harder than it needs to be. Machiavelli observed that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But let's decode what he really meant. He's not advocating for cruelty. He's saying that respect based on tangible consequences is more reliable than affection based on emotion. People's feelings change, but their calculation of self-interest, that remains constant. When you stop being available to everyone, when you create scarcity around your time and attention, you're not being mean. You're being Machiavellian in the truest sense. You're recognizing that abundance breeds contempt, while scarcity breeds value. And if you want to be valued, you must be scarce. Here's a practical example. Two people want your help. One constantly asks for favors and never reciprocates. The other respects your boundaries and offers value before requesting anything. According to conventional morality, you should help everyone equally. According to Machiavellian wisdom, you should reward the behavior you want to encourage and withdraw from the behavior you want to discourage. Not out of spite, but out of strategic self-preservation. Jung talked about projection, how we see in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. Machiavelli would say, learn to recognize what others are projecting onto you and use those projections strategically. If someone sees you as trustworthy, let them trust you with small things while you evaluate if they deserve trust with big things. If someone sees you as dangerous, don't waste energy convincing them otherwise. Let their fear keep them at a respectful distance. The most exhausting way to live is trying to convince everyone of your good intentions. The most powerful way to live is letting your actions speak while your words remain carefully measured. When you talk less, people listen more. When you react less, people wonder more. When you explain less, people respect more. But this requires something most people lack: the ability to tolerate being misunderstood, to know your own heart while letting others speculate, to be comfortable with the fact that some people will call you manipulative for the same behaviors they call strategic in people they admire. The difference isn't the behavior, it's whether they benefit from it. Machiavelli wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. This is liberation disguised as cynicism. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need the right people to experience your true value while maintaining strategic presentation to everyone else. And here's the part that connects Machiavelli to Jung's individuation process. Becoming whole doesn't mean being the same person to everyone. It means knowing your core self so well that you can adapt your expression without losing your essence. The manipulative person has no core. They're just mirrors reflecting what others want to see. The integrated person has a solid core and consciously chooses how much to reveal based on wisdom, not fear. So how do you develop this skill without losing your soul? How do you become strategically influential without becoming morally bankrupt? This is where most teachings on power fail you. They give you the tactics without the ethics, the techniques without the wisdom to wield them responsibly. First, understand this foundational truth. Manipulation for mutual benefit isn't manipulation, it's leadership. When you guide someone toward a decision that serves both of you, even if they don't initially see it, you're not being deceptive, you're being visionary. The skill is knowing the difference. Start by becoming a student of human nature. Not the idealized version taught in motivational books, but the real, flawed, predictable version that actually exists. Watch how people respond when they feel threatened versus when they feel safe. Notice how they make decisions based on emotion and then justify with logic. Observe how they respect boundaries from those who enforce them and ignore boundaries from those who don't. Machiavelli advised, never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. But let's reframe deception to strategic communication. You don't lie about your destination. You simply choose the path that creates least resistance. When someone asks your opinion, you don't always give it directly. Sometimes you ask questions that lead them to the conclusion you want them to reach. Why? Because people support what they create, even if you architected the path they walked to create it. Here's a practical technique: the strategic pause. When someone asks you something important, resist the urge to answer immediately. Let silence hang in the air for 3 seconds. This does multiple things. It makes you appear thoughtful rather than reactive. It makes them slightly uncomfortable, which often leads them to fill the silence with additional information. And it gives you time to choose your response rather than defaulting to your programmed reaction. Another technique: agree and redirect. When someone presents an objection, never argue directly. Say, that's a valid concern and I've thought about that too. Then present your perspective as building on theirs rather than contradicting it. You're not being dishonest. You're being psychologically intelligent about how humans process information. We're more open to ideas that acknowledge our concerns than ideas that dismiss them. Learn the power of the planted seed. Instead of arguing for your position, ask questions that guide others to your conclusion. Have you considered what might happen if? I wonder what the effect would be. What do you think would change if? You're not telling them what to think. You're creating the conditions for them to think what you want them to think. And when they arrive at it themselves, they'll defend it as if it were their own insight. Because in their mind it is. But here's where integrity enters. You must know your actual values and never compromise them for short-term influence. Machiavelli has been misunderstood for centuries as advocating for amorality. But read carefully, and you'll see he's advocating for practical wisdom. He's saying, be good when you can, be strategic when you must, but never be naive. The person with no principles is dangerous and unstable. The person with rigid principles is predictable and manipulatable. But the person with core values and flexible tactics, that person navigates the world with both integrity and effectiveness. Now let's talk about the discomfort you'll face. When you start implementing these approaches, people will notice you've changed. Those who benefited from your previous transparency will accuse you of being secretive. Those who relied on your reactions will call you cold. Those who took advantage of your availability will say you've become selfish. Good. That means it's working. Jung spoke about the process of individuation requiring you to disappoint the collective. You must betray others' expectations to be true to yourself. And this is never comfortable. You'll question whether you're becoming the villain in someone else's story. You'll wonder if you're losing your humanity. But here's what's actually happening. You're losing your naivety. You're shedding the fantasy that the world rewards goodness with fairness. You're accepting that protection of your energy, your time, and your peace requires strategic boundaries, not just emotional ones. Machiavelli observed that the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. This is the duality you must embody. Cunning when the situation requires reading hidden motives. Strength when the situation requires clear boundaries, and wisdom to know which is needed when. Practice calculated vulnerability. This sounds contradictory, but it's powerful. Share personal stories, but only the ones that serve a purpose. Show emotion, but only when it creates connection or diffuses tension. Be authentic, but be strategic about which parts of your authentic self you reveal in different contexts. The amateur manipulator lies constantly and gets caught eventually. The skilled influencer tells selective truths and becomes known for integrity. Why? Because when you do speak, you're reliable. When you do commit, you follow through. Your word becomes gold because you don't give it cheaply. Learn to lose battles strategically to win wars. Sometimes you concede a point not because you agree, but because the fight isn't worth the energy and the concession costs you nothing. Machiavelli understood that appearing flexible makes you seem reasonable while actually maintaining control over what matters. Here's something that will shift your entire perspective. Most people telegraph their moves before they make them. They announce their intentions, broadcast their plans, explain their reasoning before anyone even asks. And then they wonder why they face so much resistance. Machiavelli would laugh at this naivety. He understood that surprise is a weapon, that mystery is magnetic, that keeping your cards close makes every move more impactful. Stop announcing your next move. Stop explaining your decisions before you've made them. Stop seeking validation for choices that are yours alone to make. When you operate with this level of discretion, something fascinating happens. People can't prepare counter-arguments because they don't know what's coming. They can't undermine your plans because they don't know what your plans are. And when you finally act, it's decisive, complete, and harder to oppose. Think about the people you find most intriguing. Chances are they're not the ones who share every thought and feeling. They're the ones who reveal themselves in layers, who keep you guessing just enough to stay interested. This isn't game playing for manipulation's sake. It's understanding that human psychology craves what it cannot fully grasp. But let me be crystal clear about something. This approach requires you to be genuinely competent. You can't fake mystery if there's nothing substantial beneath it. You can't strategically withhold if you have nothing of value to give. The power of selective revelation only works when what you eventually reveal is worth the wait. So before you implement any of these techniques, you must do the inner work. You must actually become someone worth paying attention to. Jung called this the integration of the shadow. You must face the parts of yourself that are ambitious, strategic, even ruthless, and stop pretending they don't exist. Because here's the paradox. The person who denies their capacity for manipulation is the most dangerous. They manipulate unconsciously, without awareness, often with more damage than someone who understands their power and wields it responsibly. The conscious Machiavellian is paradoxically more trustworthy than the unconscious people pleaser. Why? Because they know what they're doing and can therefore control it. The people pleaser manipulates through guilt, through martyrdom, through passive-aggressive withdrawal, all while believing they're just being nice. At least the strategic influencer is honest with themselves about their methods. So ask yourself right now, are you manipulating unconsciously through weakness or influencing consciously through strength? Are you using guilt to get what you want or clear communication backed by consequences? Are you playing victim to control narratives, or are you standing in your power and letting others adjust to your boundaries? The transformation we're talking about isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming conscious of who you already are and making deliberate choices about how you wield that self in the world. If this content is resonating with you, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. We explore these psychological depths weekly, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. So what does life look like when you've integrated these principles? When you've become someone who understands influence without being consumed by it? First, you become remarkably calm, because you're no longer at the mercy of every emotional wind that blows. You see the games people play, not with judgment, but with clarity. And that clarity creates space between stimulus and response. You're no longer reactive, you're responsive, and there's a world of difference. Second, you develop real confidence. Not the loud, performative kind that masks insecurity. The quiet kind that comes from knowing you can navigate any social situation, handle any personality type, and protect yourself from manipulation while occasionally employing it for mutual benefit. Third, you attract different people. Those who want easy targets drift away. Those who respect skillful navigation drift closer. Your relationships become more honest because they're based on mutual respect rather than one person constantly giving and another constantly taking. You'll find yourself in fewer arguments because you've stopped trying to convince people who don't want to be convinced. You'll experience less drama because you've stopped engaging with chaos. You'll feel more energized because you've stopped depleting yourself, trying to be everything to everyone. Machiavelli wasn't teaching you to become a monster. He was teaching you to survive and thrive in a world that contains monsters. Jung wasn't asking you to hide your authentic self. He was asking you to know it so well that you could protect it behind strategic presentation. The integrated person, the individuated person, the Machiavellian sage, they're the same archetype expressed differently. Someone who knows themselves completely, adapts contextually, maintains core integrity, and navigates social dynamics with both skill and ethics. You're not becoming fake. You're becoming sophisticated. You're not losing your heart. You're protecting it with wisdom. You're not manipulating for harm. You're influencing for mutually beneficial outcomes while protecting yourself from those who would exploit your transparency. Today, we learned from Niccolo Machiavelli that true power isn't loud, it's invisible, and from Carl Jung that knowing yourself is the foundation for navigating others without losing yourself in the process. If these insights sparked something in you, hit that like button to share this wisdom with others who are ready to see beyond comfortable illusions. Subscribe to join our community, where we explore the psychology and philosophy that actually transforms how you move through the world. Now tell me in the comments, what's one situation where you wish you'd been more strategically silent instead of emotionally transparent? Let's discuss what we're learning. Remember, the art of influence without detection isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming skilled enough to protect who you already are. Until we meet again, may you walk through the world with eyes wide open and a heart well guarded. The next video explores what happens when you master the art of strategic absence. You won't want to miss it. May you find our talks not only educational, but also inspirational and hopefully, ultimately, transformational. See you next time.